Hello and welcome to the Jesus Witch podcast. I'm your host, Lena Elsaya Lee, also known as Lena the Jesus Witch on TikTok and Instagram. The Jesus Witch podcast is a show dedicated to opening the conversation about including Jesus in witchery practices. The goal of this podcast is to not be evangelical. The goal is to spread the love, light, truth, acceptance, and oneness that is Jesus Christ himself. Here at the Jesus Witch podcast, we believe all people are loved by God and all people are loved by Jesus. We believe in community and the power of fellowship. We believe in giving whatever you reasonably can to help your neighbor who's in need. And above all, we believe in the power of creating a relationship with Jesus that is authentic and unique to you. Join me for new episodes of the Jesus Witch podcast every single Monday, and be sure to subscribe to us on your favorite podcasting app. Today on the podcast, I have Dr. Paige here with me to talk about Asherah, because that is her professional study. So Paige, would you like to introduce yourself to the listeners? Who are you and what do you do?
Yes, absolutely. And it's a dream to be here. I'm so glad. So I'm Paige. I am from the UK and I'm a PhD student studying the goddess Asherah throughout ancient Israel. Although I also have an academic interest in everyday women's lives in ancient Israel, household religion and divinatory practice, and the goddesses of the surrounding areas of the ancient Near East. And I consider myself a feminist scholar who hopefully can begin to rectify some of the mistakes of older misogynistic scholars, because back in the day, for example, a lot of male scholars would be extremely racist and sexist all at the same time. So there was this idea, for example, that Israel was like the moral standard and everywhere else was like morally depraved. And then add on to that the fact that they saw women as these like sensual figures that got projected onto goddesses. And so a lot of older scholarship say that Asherah had a sex cult in ancient Israel, and goddesses are these like sexy, sensual, depraved figures that lead men into temptation. But the reality is that just isn't true. So for example, when scholars saw like images of naked goddesses from Israel and the wider ancient Near East, they would associate that with sex and sensuality. But in reality, a lot of the time, it's because these goddesses were earth fertility goddesses. So to kind of like show that they weren't cultured and domesticated, they were naked. But then alongside that, because the ancient Near East is very symbolic and these images are full of symbols and metaphors, because like human everyday women were fully clothed, seeing like a naked woman on like an image, that showed that it wasn't an everyday woman being shown, it was a goddess. So basically these images were just sexualized falsely by these scholars. And actually, like, in fact, because, so for example, in ancient Israel, because houses were like just such close-knit units and life was really difficult in ancient Israel. So in order to like sustain livelihood and to ensure family survival, men and women had to work together very closely, equal yet complementary. And so this then got reflected in the divine realm, where goddesses had equal yet distinct roles from men. So women in the household, for example, they were often involved in extraordinarily complex processes and diverse processes, much more than men. So a famous scholar called Tikva Frymys-Kensky, she says women turned the raw into the cooked. So for example, they would take basic elements like wheat and wool and turn them into clothing and bread and food. So because of this, they were associated with culture and creating culture and cultural transformation. And so goddesses become associated with this in the same way. And then also there's the fact that women, they kind of had separate houses, but then shared courtyards. And so they would meet in these shared courtyards to do kind of certain tasks, and they would talk amongst themselves. And so they got kind of associated with the transmission of knowledge and wisdom. So therefore goddesses are associated with divine knowledge and wisdom. And we see this particularly with Asherah. So, for example, Asherah's title is Asherah of the Sea, and this refers to the cosmic sea, where like the sea was thought to be like the place where divine order occurred and life. So Asherah is associated with all of these world-sustaining things.
That's like that was such an interesting introduction to who you are and like what you believe. And like I I heard so much intersection between like goddess like culture and then like so funny you were saying like women are associated with culture. I was like seeing like pop culture in my mind because like,
Yeah,
goddesses how like a male deity is not sexualized in the way that a female deity is. Like and I do it myself in my own practice. I know a lot of people do it in their own practices. Like I know we're here talking about Asherah, but like let's take Lilith for example, right? Like
mm-hmm.
she's like known as being more of like a sexy deity.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm sure they exist, but I have personally not encountered a specifically male sexy deity. Uh,
no,
no. And like, this might
Mhm.
be TMI, but like it's like to the point like if, my husband and I are, getting down, to do things and I have my Jesus candle lit, I will go and blow his candle out because I'm like, no, 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 you don't need to see this. You know, like if Venus's candles lit or Lilith or even like Asherah, and I mean God is attached to that because like they like to share one, but like I
yeah,
won't with them because I'm like a little bit more, comfortable and because they just have like a more like sex appeal to them too. So like that's so interesting, but that's also like in pop culture how like male singers are not like sexualized the
yeah,
way female singers are. Like,
yeah,
like I love me some Sabrina Carpenter, but I don't see a man dressing like Sabrina or singing the way that she does to get on stage.
yeah.
So wow, that was just like a little realization I personally had as you were talking. It's like really interesting how that like continues to bleed on out to everyday women. And even Asher being like the goddess of the everyday woman, it's interesting that like connected there for me that way. All right,
Sure.
cool.
Just like a side note about Lilith while we're here. So
Okay, yeah.
I've been really enjoying Lilith's mythology recently, and she is so demonized by it's almost like so women in the ancient world and goddesses, when they're not under like a man's authority and domain, so like when they're not domesticated and harnessed into like domestic life and child rearing, their unencumbered sexuality is seen as a threat. And so they get like the brunt of male projections of like fears of this like kind of woman's sexuality. And Lilith is one of those. I mean, all these projections against like her coming into homes and disturbing like family dynamics, it's because of this fear of the powerful woman, the woman with autonomy who knows what she wants. But interestingly, Lilith's power comes from God. It came in the myths because she said God's name, God's divine name, and she was infused with his power. And she's benevolent. I mean, if you think about it, God never stopped her from leaving the garden. And at the same time, she says, I respect God's boundaries, when you've got these amulets, I will not cross those boundaries. So she's benevolent.
I think Lilith has a very misunderstood, and I think it's like purposefully misunderstood, like you were saying, like energy where she's very demonized because
Yeah.
she's a more like autonomous woman
Mhm.
goddess. Because like, as somebody who has a more quote unquote traditional home, when I work with her, she like favors my husband because she likes equal partnership kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I think that really tracks for her story and mythology. But I also feel like Lilith is this is like so off topic of Astra, but I also feel like Lilith is similar to Medusa in the sense that like Medusa's lore got modernized and reclaimed by feminist women.
Yeah.
Something empowering in the same way that like Lilith's lore got modernized and feminized, like feministized, whatever word you
Mhm.
want to put there, to for modern women to like use her as a power symbol.
Yeah.
So I find though that like those two very interesting. And I think that like they are where that like starts to turn because like they're sexy, but they're also scary. And like they have
Yeah.
like respected energy that like men are starting to like respect a little bit more. Like male practitioners do not fuck around with Medusa or Lilith. Like they just know not to mess with them in the wrong way. Uh,
Sure.
so I think that they're getting like the respect that they deserve now, kind of thing. But like in our niche, area of the world, not, broadly. But
There's a thing with these kind of goddesses is because they're kind of like the wilder goddesses. So like Anat at Canaan, because they're associated with fertility. So like, for example, maternal goddesses like Asherah, because they are focused on families and homes, they've got a very specific role and it's very traditionally female. But earth fertility goddesses, on the other hand, they are usually powerful because they encompass the entirety of nature. So all the plants and all the animals. So they're vast and they're powerful. So because of that, they kind of bend gender boundaries in this very interesting way because they have the power of men, which is why they get associated with war. But then at the same time, they are still female. They're still the female essence of creation. So because of this kind of like boundary bending, they get associated with danger and fear because first of all, men can't control them because they're wild, they're bigger, they're vaster, like the nature around them. And then at the same time, they kind of like are in the man's world. They're outside, just like men's roles were outside, and yet they're not men; they're women. So where do they belong? And I don't know, it's fascinating to me.
no, that is really fascinating, and maybe one of these days we have to like come back and have just like a broader goddess conversation. Um,
Yeah.
but just to circle back to our girl Asherah, why were you interested in studying Asherah in the first place? Like, did you start with goddesses like in as a whole first, and then learn about her and like spark an interest? Like, what?
Yeah, so no, not at all. It was a happy little accident. So it started out where I was really looking at wisdom themes. So one of my passions is approaching the Bible within its cultural context, because obviously it's an ancient text. When we approach it now, we approach it with our modern mindsets and our modern prejudices. And the result of that is that the Bible gets turned into this weapon of fear and something that causes trauma for people. But when you can begin to see it through the ancient mindset and the things that they value, it becomes this whole different picture. So, for example, with the Torah, so we view the Torah now, these law documents, through our legal frameworks. So, these very solid lists of do's and don'ts. And if you do what's bad, you'll get that punishment. But in the ancient world, these legal documents were wisdom texts, not law texts. So, the Torah, for example, was the way that a leader would show that they were infused with the wisdom of the gods. So they would create these lists as like kind of an illustration of how wise they were. It was almost like, uh, this is proof that I'm infused with divine energy because I have this wisdom. So in these situations, these are certain ways that wisdom can look like. So it wasn't like a legal text of you do this, you're definitely going to get this. It was more like an artistic picture of this is one way that wisdom can look in this one situation. Certainly not the only way, but just, one way that the divine worked. And then anyway, yeah, so wisdom. So I started off with wisdom, and then that led me to Lady Wisdom in Proverbs 8. And as I was reading about her, it says that she cries out, and she cries out from the highest point. That's temple language. So this is imagery of a goddess of wisdom in the temple. And it says that she plays before God and she interacts with humanity and creation. So there was all this goddess language. And at the same time, I was studying archaeology, and I discovered that all throughout Israel, right up until the exilic period, all over Israel, and particularly in houses, were found these small figurines. And the bottom half of them look like tree trunks, and the top half looks like a goddess figure. And so that kind of is very much Lady Wisdom, because Proverbs says that wisdom is a tree of life. So, yeah, this goddess wisdom. So I connected them. And then I discovered Asherah in the Hebrew Bible. So she's mentioned over 40 times, and her cultic symbol in both the archaeology and in the text is that of a nurturing tree of life. So, for example, Deuteronomy 16 says that it can be planted. And then something else, just a very quick side note, is that the Canaanite texts were discovered in 1928. So before that, nobody knew what Asherah was in the Bible. And so people just kind of thought it was like a cultic symbol, maybe of Yahweh or another deity like Baal. But there was a scholar in the 1800s called Julius Wellhausen, and he went, so there's like a text in Hosea, and it's where Yahweh says, I am a luxurious tree. All of your fruit comes from me. And Wellhausen looked at it and said, there's something not quite right about this scripture. I think it needs to be like amended and changed so that instead of being about Yahweh, it looks more like it should say, I am his Asherah and his Anat. Your fruit comes from me. In which case, there is a case there that Asherah, as this kind of like fertility tree goddess, has been staring us in the face the whole time.
Well, yeah, like that's like I definitely think that the church has like little remnants of her, like you were saying, like they stare at it, like she stares in our face, like the Holy Spirit, like that's very divine feminine and wisdom feeling to me. But like it's
Yeah,
interesting to me how like the search for wisdom led you to like the goddess of wisdom. That is like the biggest. See, I tell people a lot that like working with like the Abrahamic is very funny because they do very
yeah,
things, and that's one of those like very funny things that the the Abrahamic would do. Like you searched for wisdom, you found the goddess of wisdom, and now you go to school to study the goddess of wisdom. That's Abrahamic humor 101 right there.
oh, for sure.
Yeah. So I mean, you definitely answered this a little bit as you were going through and like talking about like the background of Asherah in ancient Israel and like how she's associated with fertility and like trees and nature and like a pairing to the Abrahamic God. But to you, based on your research, who do you think Asherah is?
Yes. So to answer this question, I need to begin by explaining that Israelite religion is a subset or a type of Canaanite religion. So the archaeology shows us that rather than being separate from Canaan, Israel actually came out of Canaan and took Canaan's like deities with them, which is why all throughout the Old Testament we see the deities of the Canaanite pantheon abundantly. So, for example, the head deity of the Canaanite pantheon is the wise, benevolent father god El, and he is also Yahweh in ancient Israel. So, for example, Israel is a name which means El strives, and the Bible takes no issue with El at all. So, for example, Yahweh is praised in El terminology, and Yahweh has names such as El Shaddai throughout the scripture. And not only that, there are literally names of significant people in the Bible that mean Yahweh is El. So, Joel, for example, that literally means Yahweh is El. And Elijah literally means El is Yahweh. And then there's a verse in Exodus as well, where Moses is talking, and Yahweh says to Moses, you have known me by one name, i.e., El, but now you'll know me by another. So the deities are absolutely conflated. Okay, so back to Asherah. So in the Canaanite text, Asherah was the wife of El, and she is the quintessential divine feminine who was relatable to both mothers and wives. So, for example, in the Canaanite myth of the Baal cycle, she is first introduced as working with a spindle, the everyday woman's object. So she's also known as the mother of all the gods of the Canaanite pantheon, and her children are affectionately termed her pride of lions because of her nurturing care for them. So, alongside this, at Canaan, she also had the influential role of queen mother. So, for example, in the Baal cycle, the earth fertility deity Baal, he wants a temple for himself so that he can progress the seasons by bringing the rain. But to do so, he approaches Asherah and asks her to ask El on his behalf so that he can have his request granted. And that is exactly the role of queen mothers, because queen mothers would take people's concerns and they would resolve them. And alongside this, she's called upon to name the next heir to the throne, which is the job of the queen mother. And then in other myths, she is a nursing goddess to the royal family, and she closely takes care of them. So, anyway, these roles in Canaan get transferred over to ancient Israel. So she is exactly the same goddess throughout ancient Israel. Number one, she's the same goddess because of her queen mother imagery. In 1 Kings, she's associated with the queen mother Makar, who makes an image of her in the temple. And it also says that people used to weave hangings for her in the temple as well. And obviously, the temple and the royal court were extremely connected. Alongside this, Jezebel, the queen mother, is said to have 400 prophets of Asherah. So Asherah is definitely connected to queen mothers throughout ancient Israel. Okay, number 2, she retains her wifely role because she is found alongside Yahweh. So in passages such as Deuteronomy 16, it says that Asherahs were planted beside Yahweh. Her place was beside him because she was his wife. And this is found in archaeology. So inscriptions have been found naming Yahweh and his Asherah, as in his wife Asherah. And at certain locations, for example, Kuntilla Adrid in northern Sinai, such inscriptions have been found with Asherah's tree of life imagery and her lion imagery. So that's all about her nurturing maternal role. And then Yahweh's complementary husband role is also found in images on this pie floor, this large storage jar where these images are found. Because there's these like images of bulls, which symbolize like masculine fertility and virility. And there's also even an image of them in like a husband and wife pose as well. Okay, so that's the second point. And then the third point is that she also retains her maternal nurturing imagery because, for example, Jeremiah 44 calls her the Queen of Heaven and says families would come together to do activities to worship her, such as baking cakes to her. They said that when they openly did this, the land flourished and everybody had abundance because she was taking care of them. And also, as I previously mentioned before, found throughout the houses of ancient Israel are these pillar figurines, which are half goddess and half tree. And the goddess half, they're often seen holding their breasts. And that is kind of a symbol of maternal nurture and how Asherah was the goddess who presided over protective concerns and all the concerns to do with like childbirth and children and mothers.
That's I love that answer with like the three-parted answer because that kind of like, there's so many triple-faced goddesses throughout
Oh yeah.
different pantheons, and like kind of seeing her in like the triple face as well, where she's like the queen mother, where she's like, which almost gives me like crone vibes, even though it's called like
Yeah.
mother, because it's like a very wise, like counseling, like, directorial kind of position. And then she retains her like wife, like goddess kind of energy there. And then we have like the nurturing too, like of the the maiden mat, what I mean, the
Yeah, yeah.
crone, maiden, and mother. There we go. um so I love that. I love that little like way of like looking at her and like seeing her more as a multi faceted, and like, if we see God as like a whole God, you know what I'm saying? Like we see
Yeah.
him in everything, then if she's his equal, we should be seeing her in everything too. And also, like, as like a little Leo heaven narcissistic side note, it like literally like clicked for me. Like God, like L. Okay, like EL. That's how it is, right? That's how it's
Yeah,
spelled.
yeah.
My
Yeah.
last name is Lel Saya. So like I'm God,
Yes.
literally.
And yeah, and Asherah is the mother of lions. And as we were talking about in our Christian witch study, Leo mother.
Oh shit.
Yeah, and that's your midheaven, is that
Midheaven,
right?
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's why I have these little narcissistic thoughts 100%, you know?
I'm a Leo, so
I love it. Leos are great.
for
It's like one of my favorite signs. Um, okay.
sure.
Um, So, what is something that you think Christian witches should know about Asherah before reaching out to her to like work with her in a deity space?
Oh, absolutely. So, yeah, I just want to say, don't worry, I've got you. Asherah is totally biblical and authentic to Israelite religion. She isn't a foreign addition. She has always belonged there and she always will. So, for example, she was officially banished during the reforms of Josiah, but his predecessors happily worshipped her. So, Josiah introduced monotheism to Israel, and after this, the texts were edited. So, Asherah was demonized and vilified after this. But what's really funny about this is that Josiah said that he found the book of Deuteronomy and that it was kind of like Yahweh's old laws that everybody had neglected. But actually, it seems a lot more likely that this is one of those wisdom documents that he had created in order to say, I am supposed to be king, look at my wisdom. So he did this to try and legitimize his reign. And we know this because the language of the document reflects very later treaty language from the time of Josiah. And the words used in the language, it's all much later than early Israel. So it seems that Josiah just wanted to kind of legitimize his kingship and increase his power. And one of the ways that he wanted to do that was to centralize worship and focus it on one sole deity so that he could kind of control the religion a bit more. And the reason that kind of he attacked Asherah is because it says in scripture that she was worshipped on every high hill and under every green tree. And women were the directors, I know, women were the directors of household religion. And so they would worship Asherah in the house, which he had no control over. And so I think he wanted to absorb her into Yahweh to control religious expression. However, the Bible shows his reforms were not successful because, as I said, even right up to the exile, these little goddess figurines are found inside houses. And then at the same time, when Asherah disappears, all of a sudden, cities and matriarchs, the prophets begin praying to them and lamenting to them as if they were goddess figures. And then Lady Wisdom, Asherah in another form, arises. And then Israel gets like goddess status as well in some ways in the prophets. She's depicted as like Yahweh's wife. And then Isaiah talks about Yahweh in maternal language. So Asherah just continues to exist in a different form. And she never really left.
No, she never really left. And like as you were talking about that, it reminded me of how like in Judaism itself, like they call God, they call him Hashem, which just means the name. There's no gendered language when talking about like God on an everyday basis. In Judaism itself. So like that's one way that they kind of tried to keep the goddess, but like they did it, you know what I'm saying? So like she's definitely, and then like with Catholicism, they got Mother Mary. They worship Mother Mary. If any Catholic
Yeah.
tells you that they don't worship Mother Mary, that's a lie. I was Catholic for a very long time. Like they absolutely worship Mother Mary, which is fine. She deserves to be
Yeah.
worshipped, but like not as the queen of heaven, you know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
I feel
Yeah.
like that's like reserved for Asherah. Mother Mary should be like reserved for being the queen of dealing with probably the most bratty teenager to ever exist.
Yeah, for sure.
um we love Jesus though. um okay, so my fifth and final question that I have for you, Dr. Paige. What is something you think modern Christian witches can do? Actually, no, my question here is can you tell me about Jesus in the early no,
No.
no, I'm kidding.
Oh my
Okay. The
goodness. Can you
actual question is what is something you think modern Christian witches can do to connect with Astra's ancient energy?
Yes. So, yeah, I love this question. So, first of all, keep it simple. Asherah is literally the quintessential divine feminine benevolent presence. So, she's gentle, she's nurturing, and she's wise, which means that there are no like rules for how you should approach her. It's kind of an anything goes because anything that reminds you of the divine feminine can be an expression of her. So even just having a simple background awareness of her allows her to like infuse your day with blessings and wisdom, and it can be a comfort. So if you're not fully ready to interact with her yet, maybe because of religious trauma, just kind of leave the door open and be aware. Like, and that just openness allows her wisdom to come in. She's literally the maternal goddess of wisdom. So you will kind of get wisdom for your journey, and she will kind of guide you and help you, even if you're just a little bit open to like kind of develop your practices where you can kind of let her in a bit more. I mean, that's been the case for me. And then I also love what Mimi, feral Southern housewife, said in the Christian Witch Church. She said that basically because Asherah is associated with the sea, she has seashells that she puts on her altar to her. And that it kind of reminds me of like, so in Jeremiah, how it says that the families would come together to worship her. That kind of reminds me of like going out with your family to the beach and picking seashells. And so another way that you can worship her is just days out with your family. I mean, just devoting those days to her, any activities with your children or your family. So yeah, there are ways to connect with her. And then another thing, which so Lena's Jesus Witch Discord, we host Christian witch studies. And one of the things that we were talking about is that those Judean pillar figurines, those little goddess figurines of Asherah, are also termed ancient Barbie dolls. And so people have been talking about like putting dolls on their altar or anything that connects them with their inner child, because that way you're connecting with Mama Asherah's presence, and it's healing and it's fun. And so for any Swifties out there, creating like Asherah friendship bracelets, that's a great way to get in touch with kind of like Asherah's maternal presence and healing your inner child as well. And then alongside that, her cultic symbol was a tree. And she's a very grounded goddess because she's the goddess of wisdom. So you could go for a walk in nature, just anything that connects you to the earth and grounds you. I mean, even just pray to her the way that you would to God the Father, because she's literally his feminine counterpart, the divine feminine.
Yeah, I think all of those are great pieces of advice. I think they're all things that I personally do in my practice. Aside from the seashells, um, I can't get over those being like those are associated with Venus in my head because of the birth of
Okay, yeah.
like, coming out of the shell and the sea foam. So like yeah, I can't my brain can't do do that. But like we do definitely do like a lot of trees, family time. One of my favorite things in the summertime is literally to like lay in the ocean and like look at the sun and be like, I'm being held by the mother while like being watched by the father. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like just having that like dichotomy together is really nice. Um and like praying to Asherah, that's definitely I think that's something that I personally struggle with because I'm so used to like God, what's going on? But like there are definitely like certain things that I pray to Asherah specifically about. Like, you know, when I was pregnant, when I found out I was pregnant with that third baby, I was Asherah, please let it be a girl. Let it be a girl. Like I was begging her. I like so remember I have a tree outside that I dedicated to her, and I was like going to that thing like, Asherah, I don't know what I'm gonna do with three boys. Please, if there's any way, like just like let it be a girl.
Oh,
Um, so although like my daughter is the most crazy out of all three of my children, so like maybe I would have been more sane with a third boy. Who knows? So
my
anyway.
daughter's the same.
Because they're smart. Like, you know what's my
Yeah.
problem? Now I'm connecting it, right? Prayed to the goddess of wisdom for a daughter. So she gave me a daughter that was much smarter than me, and that's my problem. Yeah,
That's brilliant.
that is it.
Yeah.
So,
For sure. And I loved what you were saying about how you kind of like soak up the sun, and that's Asherah, because one of the scholars of Asherah has said that Asherah of the sea should be translated Asherah of the day, making her a solar deity. Yeah, I know. And Yahweh in Israel, there's kind of like some connections with him and the sun as well.
yeah, yeah, and but I've also like heard her being associated with the moon too, because like the moon is very wisdomy. I just think they're like all, like I said before, all encompassing deities. So literally, like what you said,
Yeah.
anything that reminds you of Asherah, like you can literally like dedicate
Anything goes. Yeah.
to her. I mean, there are things that are a little bit more historically accurate, such as like trees
Yeah.
or like, you know, I know for like a little bit pomegranates at some point were associated with Asherah.
Yeah.
You know, marijuana has been associated with Asherah throughout the ages. So like there are things, you know, family, stuff like that
For
that you
sure.
can that are like dedicated to her, but then you can also, like you were saying, interpret it for your own
Yeah.
self. Like Barbie dolls, I love that. The idea of putting dolls for Asherah, like I love that. So yeah, there's just a lot of different ways you can work with her and just make her a part of your life. So Paige,
Anything goes. Yeah.
is there anything else you want to add before we start to wrap it up?
I think I'm good. I think I've covered most things that, I mean, unless there's something you particularly want to know.
No, I mean nothing. I mean, I'm very interested about Jesus and the old, but apparently you can't answer that. See, now that's everyone's gonna be like, what the heck are they talking about? See, it's an inside
Yeah.
joke. You had to be there.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. No. Okay, Paige, thank you so much for having this conversation with me and teaching us all about Asherah and giving us some of the wisdom that she gave to you. Um, is there anywhere on the interwebs that the listeners can find you if they want to connect more?
You have to catch me on the Jesus Witch Discord because that is my home.
All right, you heard it here. You got to go to the Discord group. You got to be part of the fam. It's a free Discord group. The link will be in the show notes page.